Picture a world where the rains never came, where the fountains of the deep remained sealed, and where humanity's darkest chapter was never washed clean. Imagine if the most famous flood in history, the one that reset civilization itself, simply never happened. In this reality, the corruption that once made God regret creating mankind continues to spread like a virus through every generation, every nation, every bloodline. But what if everything we thought we knew about our world's fresh start was wrong? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. Let's step back to a time when the world was young, when giants walked the earth, and when God himself was about to make a choice that would define all of human history. But in our story, that choice takes a different turn. Chapter 1. The Divine Warning. The morning sky stretched endlessly above the ancient world as Noah worked his fields outside the growing city of corruption. The year was somewhere around 2400 BC, though time moved differently in those days, when men lived for centuries and the earth itself seemed younger, more alive. God's voice came to Noah like thunder without clouds, clear and unmistakable. "The end of all flesh has come before me," the Creator spoke, "for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." Noah dropped his tools and fell to his knees. Around him, the world continued its daily dance of evil. In the cities, giants ruled with iron fists. The sons of God had taken human women as wives, creating offspring that were neither fully human nor fully divine. These Nephilim grew in power and number, teaching forbidden knowledge and spreading corruption like poison through clear water. The violence was not just physical, it was spiritual, genetic, and cosmic. Humanity had become something God never intended. The divine image within people was being twisted, polluted, and destroyed. Every thought of man's heart was evil from morning to night. But then God gave Noah the most detailed instructions in human history. Build an ark, gather animals, prepare for waters that would rise higher than the highest mountains, make ready for a flood that would wash the earth clean and give humanity a fresh start. This was the moment when everything was supposed to change. This was when the old world was meant to die and a new one to be born. But what if, in that cosmic moment of decision, something different happened? What if the flood that was meant to cleanse the earth never came? Chapter 2. The World That Was. Before we explore what never happened, we must understand the world that was. This was not the simple, primitive society that many imagine. The antediluvian world was a place of wonders and terrors that would make our modern achievements look like children's toys. The Nephilim were not just large humans. They were the result of a forbidden mixing between the sons of God, likely fallen angels, and the daughters of men. These beings possessed strength that could move mountains, intelligence that unlocked the secrets of the universe, and lifespans that allowed them to accumulate knowledge and power across many human generations. Under their rule, humanity had developed technologies that sound impossible even today. They built cities that reached toward heaven, not just in height, but in spiritual ambition. They crafted metals stronger than our steel, created transportation that defied gravity, and developed medical knowledge that could extend life and alter the very building blocks of creation. The climate was different too. Most scientists believed the Earth was warmer and more stable, with a water canopy that created a greenhouse effect. There were no harsh seasons, No deserts, no ice caps. Rivers flowed from underground springs, and the whole earth was like a garden where life flourished in ways we can barely imagine. But with all this advancement came spiritual corruption beyond measure. The Watchers, fallen angels who had descended to earth, taught humanity things that were meant to remain hidden. They revealed the secrets of war, the arts of deception, the knowledge of plants that could heal or poison, and the mysteries of the stars that could predict the future. This was the world that God looked upon and regretted making. This was the civilization that was meant to be washed away forever. But in our story, the waters never rise, the fountains never break open, and this world of wonders and horrors continues its dark evolution through all the ages that follow. Chapter 3. The Moment That Never Came. In our alternate timeline, something changes in that cosmic moment of divine decision. Perhaps God's mercy extends beyond all human understanding. Perhaps the prayers of the righteous few create a stay of execution. Or perhaps this is simply a story of what might have been, a glimpse into a reality where judgment was postponed, not cancelled. The skies remain clear above Noah's head as he waits for instructions that seem to change. Instead of building an ark, Noah receives a different calling. He becomes a preacher of righteousness in a world that will never be cleansed by water. His message shifts from "flee the coming flood" to "turn from your evil while there is still time." But time for what? In this reality, divine patience extends like an endless river. Generations pass, and still the rain does not fall. The fountains of the deep remain sealed. The windows of heaven stay closed. Humanity continues its downward spiral, but now without the reset button that was supposed to come. Noah grows old, preaching to deaf ears. His sons marry wives from the corrupted bloodlines. His grandchildren grow up in a world where giants rule and forbidden knowledge spreads like wildfire. The righteous seed that was meant to restart humanity becomes just another voice crying in the wilderness of an unchanged world. The psychological impact on humanity is profound. In our real timeline, every culture has flood stories, dim memories of judgment that came and cleansed the earth. But in this alternate world, those stories become warnings of judgment that never arrives. People begin to believe that God either cannot or will not act against evil. Faith becomes harder to maintain when corruption seems to win every battle. The Nephilim, instead of being destroyed, grow bolder. They no longer hide their supernatural nature or limit their influence to remote regions. They establish open kingdoms where humans serve as slaves or breeding stock. Their technologies advance beyond imagination, and their spiritual corruption deepens to levels that make the original antediluvian world look pure by comparison. Chapter 4. When Giants Never Fell. Without the flood to stop them, the Nephilim bloodline explodes across the earth like a virus without cure. These are not just tall humans with extra strength. They are hybrid beings with supernatural abilities, extended lifespans, and access to knowledge that was never meant for earthly creatures. By the time Abraham is called from Ur, over 400 years after Noah's warning, the giants have established kingdoms on every continent. They rule Egypt with wisdom that builds pyramids using technologies we still cannot understand. They dominate Mesopotamia with military might that no human army can challenge. They spread across Asia, establishing dynasties that will influence human civilization for thousands of years to come. In Europe, they become the basis for legends of gods and titans that will later influence Greek and Roman mythology. But these are not legends. They are historical records of actual encounters with beings of immense power and terrible purpose. In the Americas, they build civilizations that achieve mathematical and astronomical precision beyond anything humans accomplish on their own. The genetic corruption spreads through intermarriage and forced breeding programs. Human DNA becomes polluted with sequences that were never part of God's original design. Children are born with abilities that blur the line between natural and supernatural. Some can communicate with animals. Others can see into spiritual realms that should remain hidden. Still others develop physical capabilities that make them more than human, but less than the giants who rule them. The spiritual impact is even more devastating. These hybrid beings serve as bridges between the physical and spiritual worlds. Demons find it easier to possess them. Fallen angels use them as vessels for direct communication with humans. The veil between dimensions becomes thin wherever they gather in large numbers. Religions develop around their worship. Human cultures begin to see them as gods rather than corruptions. Sacrificial systems emerge where humans offer their children, their resources, and eventually their souls to appease these powerful beings. The knowledge of the one true God becomes buried under layers of supernatural deception and genetic manipulation. By the time Moses leads Israel out of Egypt, he is not just confronting Pharaoh, but an entire system of Nephilim-controlled spirituality that has had over 1,000 years to entrench itself in human consciousness. Chapter 5. The Lost Technologies Preserved. In our world, archaeologists puzzle over ancient achievements that seem impossible for primitive peoples. The precision of Egyptian pyramids, the massive stones of Baalbek, the advanced metallurgy found in ancient sites. All these become mysteries because we assume ancient people had only simple tools and limited knowledge. But in our alternate timeline, where the flood never washed away antediluvian civilization, these technologies are not mysteries at all. They are the natural result of knowledge systems that were never interrupted. The Nephilim and their human servants continue developing sciences that make our modern world look primitive by comparison. Their understanding of physics goes beyond our quantum theories. They know how to manipulate gravity, not through complex machinery, but through understanding the fundamental forces that hold the universe together. This knowledge allows them to move stones, weighing hundreds of tons, as easily as we move pebbles. It explains how ancient structures were built with precision that our modern equipment can barely match. Their medical knowledge includes genetic manipulation that would make our current genetic engineering look like finger painting. They can extend human life, not just for decades, but for centuries. They can enhance physical abilities, improve mental capacity, and even alter the basic nature of living creatures. But they use this knowledge not to help humanity, but to create better slaves and more perfect hybrid offspring. Their astronomy goes beyond mapping stars to understanding the spiritual significance of celestial movements. They know how planetary alignments affect spiritual warfare. They can predict not just eclipses and seasons, but moments when the barriers between dimensions are weakest. They use this knowledge to time their most important magical rituals and to coordinate with spiritual beings that exist beyond our physical realm. Communication technology allows them to coordinate across vast distances instantly, not through radio waves or satellites, but through spiritual networks that connect hybrid beings regardless of physical location. A Nephilim ruler in Egypt can communicate instantly with his counterparts in Asia or the Americas. Most terrifying of all, their weapons technology includes devices that can alter reality itself. They possess tools that can cause earthquakes, redirect rivers, and influence weather patterns. They can create plagues that target specific genetic markers. They can build fortresses that exist partially in other dimensions, making them nearly impossible to attack or destroy. Chapter 6. Abraham's different journey. When God calls Abraham out of Ur around 2000 BC, he emerges into a world that looks nothing like the one we read about in our Bibles. This is not a world recovering from flood damage where human civilization is still rebuilding. This is a world where Nephilim kingdoms have had over 400 years since Noah's warning to establish total dominance. Ur itself is not just a human city, but a center of hybrid culture where advanced technology serves the worship of beings that claim to be gods, but are actually the offspring of fallen angels. Abraham's family has likely been serving these false deities for generations, not because they chose to abandon the true God, but because the knowledge of God has been systematically suppressed by supernatural beings with the power to make themselves appear divine. When God promises Abraham a land flowing with milk and honey, he is not promising an empty territory waiting to be settled. The promised land is already occupied by established Nephilim strongholds that have been building their power for over 4 centuries. The giants that Abraham's descendants will eventually face are not scattered tribes of large humans, but organized kingdoms with technologies and spiritual powers that dwarf anything human armies can bring against them. Abraham's journey becomes not just a test of faith, but a reconnaissance mission into enemy territory. Every step toward the promised land takes him deeper into regions controlled by beings who should have been destroyed in the flood that never came. His encounters with kings like Melchizedek take on new significance when we realize these may be among the last truly human rulers in a world dominated by hybrids. The covenant God makes with Abraham includes not just promises of land and descendants, but protection from spiritual forces that have had centuries to establish their dominion. The sign of circumcision becomes not just a mark of belonging to God, but a spiritual seal that protects Abraham's bloodline from genetic corruption that has polluted most of humanity. Sarah's barrenness and the miraculous birth of Isaac represent more than just God's power over nature. They demonstrate divine protection of a pure human bloodline in a world where most births produce children with some degree of Nephilim corruption. Isaac represents hope that humanity can still fulfill its original purpose despite centuries of genetic and spiritual pollution. Chapter 7. Egypt. Under ancient shadows. By the time Jacob's family arrives in Egypt, they enter a civilization that has been shaped by over 600 years of continuous Nephilim influence. This is not the Egypt that recovered after flood destruction. This is the Egypt that developed directly from antediluvian knowledge systems, without any interruption. The pharaohs are not simply human kings who learned to build impressive monuments. They are either direct descendants of Nephilim bloodlines, or humans who have been given supernatural abilities through genetic manipulation and spiritual pacts. Their power goes beyond political authority to include capabilities that make them seem like gods to ordinary people. The Great Pyramids are not just tombs or monuments, but functional devices built using technologies preserved from before Noah's time. They serve as energy generators, communication centers, and spiritual gateways that connect the physical realm to dimensions where fallen angels operate freely. Their mathematical precision comes not from careful planning, but from knowledge of cosmic principles that most humans cannot comprehend. The Egyptian priesthood preserves and develops sciences that would be considered magic in our world. They can heal diseases instantly, communicate with spiritual beings, predict future events with perfect accuracy, and even influence natural phenomena like weather and river flooding. But these abilities come at a cost. The priests serve powers that demand human sacrifice, sexual perversion, and the systematic corruption of everything God created to be pure. When Moses arrives to challenge Pharaoh, he faces not just a stubborn human king, but an entire system built on supernatural foundations. The plagues he calls down are not just demonstrations of God's power over nature, but spiritual warfare against forces that have ruled Egypt for centuries. Each plague targets specific aspects of the hybrid spiritual system that controls the nation. The crossing of the Red Sea becomes not just an escape from human pursuit, but a breakthrough past spiritual barriers that the Nephilim have established to prevent humans from leaving their control. The Egyptian army that drowns includes not just human soldiers, but hybrid beings whose deaths send shockwaves through the supernatural network that controls the ancient world. Chapter 8. Israel, among the unchanged nations. When the Israelites finally enter the Promised Land after 40 years in the wilderness, they face enemies that have had over 800 years since Noah's warning to establish their kingdoms. These are not just human tribes with different cultures and beliefs. These are Nephilim strongholds with access to technologies and spiritual powers that make conquest seem impossible for any human army. The cities of Canaan are not just walled settlements, but fortress temples that serve as anchor points for spiritual powers operating across multiple dimensions. Jericho's walls do not fall because of loud shouting, but because the Ark of the Covenant carries spiritual authority that can override the supernatural defenses built into Nephilim architecture. The giants that Joshua's spies report are not just unusually tall humans, but established dynasties of hybrid beings who rule territories with iron fists. When Caleb says, "We are well able to overcome them," he is not just expressing confidence in military strategy, but declaring faith in God's power to defeat enemies with supernatural capabilities. King Og of Bashan, whose bed was over 13 feet long, represents the kind of opponent that human armies should not be able to defeat through normal warfare. His kingdom includes not just human subjects, but networks of hybrid beings who can coordinate their defense through spiritual communication systems that operate faster than any physical messenger. The command to completely destroy these populations makes sense only when we understand that they are not fully human. The genetic corruption has progressed to the point where these beings cannot be redeemed or reformed. They must be eliminated completely to prevent their spiritual poison from spreading to the Israelites. David's battle with Goliath becomes not just a story about courage overcoming size, but about the power of faith to defeat enemies with supernatural advantages. Goliath's armor and weapons are likely made from metals and using techniques that normal human blacksmiths cannot duplicate. His strength and size come from genetic heritage that traces back to the antediluvian giants who were supposed to be destroyed in the flood that never came. Solomon's kingdom represents the high point of human achievement in a world still dominated by Nephilim powers. His wisdom includes not just practical knowledge, but understanding of spiritual principles that allow him to rule effectively, even while surrounded by supernatural enemies. His temple becomes a fortress of divine presence in a land still contested by forces that should have been eliminated centuries earlier. Chapter 9. The Prophet's Warnings Reimagined. The biblical prophets arise in a world where the corruption that provoked God's regret before Noah has had over 1,500 years to develop and entrench itself. Their messages take on new urgency when they confront not just human sin, but the ongoing influence of spiritual powers that trace their authority back to the antediluvian period. Isaiah's vision of God on his throne surrounded by seraphim comes in the context of a world where false spiritual beings have been ruling human kingdoms for over a millennium. His prophecy about the king of Babylon falling from heaven like lightning takes on new meaning when we understand that many earthly rulers are either Nephilim hybrids or humans who have made pacts with fallen angels for supernatural power. Ezekiel's encounters with strange beings and wheels within wheels make more sense in a world where interdimensional travel and communication have been common for centuries. His warnings about shepherds who feed themselves while their flocks starve address not just corrupt human leaders, but Nephilim rulers who literally view humans as livestock to be managed and consumed. Daniel's interpretation of dreams and visions becomes more significant when we realize he operates in empires built on spiritual foundations laid down before the flood that never came. Nebuchadnezzar's statue represents not just the rise and fall of human kingdoms, but the ongoing struggle between divine authority and supernatural powers that have been ruling the earth since the days of Noah. Jeremiah's warnings about covenants with death and agreements with hell address actual spiritual contracts that human leaders have made with Nephilim rulers and their fallen angel masters. His prophecies about restoration and return speak to the possibility of breaking free from supernatural bondage that has controlled human civilization for over a millennium. The prophetic books take on new layers of meaning when we understand that they describe not just spiritual metaphors, but actual encounters with beings and powers that should have been destroyed before they could establish their dominion over human affairs. Chapter 10. Jesus in an Unchanged World. When Jesus arrives in first-century Palestine, he enters a world where the original corruption has had over 2,400 years to spread, evolve, and establish itself in every aspect of human civilization. His ministry confronts not just human sin and religious hypocrisy, but the deeply rooted influence of powers and principalities that trace their authority back to before the flood that never came. The Roman Empire that rules the world is not just a human political system, but a structure built on spiritual foundations laid by beings with supernatural knowledge and abilities. Caesar's claim to divinity reflects not just political ambition, but actual connections to spiritual powers that have been ruling human affairs for millennia. The Pharisees and religious leaders that Jesus confronts represent more than just human pride and tradition. They serve as guardians of spiritual systems that blend worship of the true God with accommodation to supernatural powers that have never been properly challenged or defeated. Jesus' miracles take on new significance when we understand the level of spiritual opposition he faces. Healing the sick becomes not just restoration of physical health, but liberation from spiritual bondage imposed by beings with the knowledge and power to manipulate human genetics and physiology. The demons he casts out are not just fallen angels operating independently, but part of organized spiritual hierarchies that have had thousands of years to establish their control over human consciousness and behavior. His authority over them demonstrates divine power that supersedes even the most ancient supernatural claims to earthly dominion. The Transfiguration reveals Jesus' true glory to disciples who live in a world saturated with false spiritual manifestations. Moses and Elijah appear not just as representatives of the law and prophets, but as witnesses to God's ongoing faithfulness despite millennia of spiritual corruption and supernatural deception. The crucifixion becomes not just payment for human sin, but victory over spiritual powers that have claimed authority over death since the days when giants first walked the earth. Jesus' descent into hell and resurrection defeats systems of spiritual bondage that have held humanity captive for over 2,000 years. The Great Commission takes on new urgency when the disciples understand they are being sent into a world controlled by supernatural enemies with vast experience in deception, persecution, and spiritual warfare. Chapter 11. The Hidden Books Speak. In our alternate timeline where the flood never came, many ancient books that were supposedly lost or destroyed continue to circulate among those who know where to look. These texts provide detailed information about the ongoing activities of spiritual beings that were meant to be eliminated, but instead have had thousands of years to perfect their influence over human affairs. The books of Enoch describe not just what the Watchers did before the flood, but what they have continued doing throughout human history. These fallen angels have established schools where they teach forbidden knowledge to human students who become leaders in various fields. Their curriculum includes advanced sciences, military strategies, magical practices, and techniques for manipulating human genetics and consciousness. Enoch's detailed descriptions of the Watchers' ongoing activities reveal how they coordinate their influence across different cultures and time periods. They maintain communication networks that span the globe and operate through multiple dimensions. They have established breeding programs designed to create hybrid offspring with specific abilities needed for various aspects of their long-term plans. The Book of Jasher provides chronicles of antediluvian technologies and their preservation through secret societies and hidden bloodlines. It describes how certain human families have maintained pure genetic lines, while others have been systematically corrupted. It explains how ancient knowledge has been passed down through carefully guarded traditions that most people never encounter. The War Scroll and other Dead Sea documents reveal how certain communities have been preparing for spiritual warfare against ancient enemies throughout human history. These groups maintain detailed intelligence about supernatural threats and develop strategies for protecting pure human bloodlines from genetic and spiritual corruption. Apocryphal Gospels describe Jesus' encounters with spiritual beings that claim authority dating back to before Noah's warning. These accounts provide details about the cosmic significance of his ministry that are not included in the canonical Gospels. They reveal how his victory over death and hell breaks spiritual contracts that have bound humanity for millennia. Gnostic texts, despite their theological errors, preserve accurate information about the ongoing influence of spiritual beings that most people assume were destroyed long ago. They describe the complex hierarchies of powers and principalities that control different aspects of human civilization and reveal techniques for identifying and resisting their influence. Chapter 12. What other religions remember? While Christianity teaches that the flood destroyed most of the original corruption, other world religions preserve memories of ongoing encounters with beings and powers that trace their origins back to antediluvian times. These traditions offer alternative perspectives on humanity's relationship with supernatural forces that challenge Christian assumptions about what was actually destroyed. Hinduism's ancient texts describe Nagas, serpentine beings with supernatural abilities who continue to influence human affairs through various incarnations and manifestations. These are not mythological creatures, but actual spiritual beings that Hindu traditions recognize as having maintained their presence and power throughout human history. Their descriptions match biblical accounts of the serpent and his offspring remarkably closely. Hindu cosmology includes detailed descriptions of spiritual hierarchies and interdimensional beings that operate on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Their texts provide specific techniques for communicating with these entities and warn about the spiritual consequences of such contact. They preserve knowledge about spiritual warfare that most modern people have completely forgotten. Buddhism's teachings about ancient beings and their karmic relationships with humanity suggest ongoing interactions rather than prehistoric extinction. Buddhist meditation practices include warnings about encountering spiritual entities during advanced states of consciousness. Their texts describe how these beings attempt to influence human development and spiritual progress. Greek mythology's accounts of titans, giants, and hybrid beings are not just creative stories, but historical memories preserved in narrative form. These legends describe actual conflicts between divine authority and supernatural rebellion that have continued throughout human history rather than ending in some prehistoric judgment. Norse traditions about giants and their persistent threat to human civilization reflect ongoing spiritual warfare rather than ancient memories. Their prophecies about Ragnarok describe a final battle that suggests the conflict has never been fully resolved, but only postponed to a future time of ultimate reckoning. Indigenous traditions worldwide preserve detailed knowledge about spiritual beings that interact with humans on a regular basis. Their shamanic practices include specific protocols for dealing with entities that claim ancient authority over various aspects of the natural world. These traditions suggest that supernatural influence has been continuous rather than interrupted by any global judgment. Chapter 13: The Conspiracy Unveiled. Modern researchers who dig deep enough into certain bloodlines, secret societies, and power structures discover evidence that some human organizations trace their origins and authority directly back to antediluvian times. Without the flood's interruption, these networks have had over 4,000 years to establish global influence and develop sophisticated methods for controlling human civilization. Genealogical research reveals that certain families maintain detailed records going back far beyond what mainstream historians consider possible. These bloodlines carefully track genetic markers that preserve specific traits and abilities passed down from hybrid ancestors. They intermarry according to strict genetic protocols designed to maintain supernatural capabilities while avoiding the physical deformities that often accompany Nephilim heritage. Secret society rituals and symbols consistently reference knowledge systems and spiritual practices that predate known human civilizations. Their initiations include contact with spiritual beings that claim authority based on contracts and covenants established before recorded history. Their ceremonies recreate antediluvian worship practices that most people assume were lost forever. Archaeological discoveries consistently uncover evidence of technologies and achievements that mainstream science cannot explain using known human capabilities. These findings are often suppressed or reinterpreted to fit conventional historical narratives, but careful analysis reveals patterns of advanced knowledge that suggest continuous development rather than periodic rediscovery. Genetic studies reveal anomalous DNA sequences in certain populations that cannot be explained through normal human evolution or migration patterns. These genetic markers appear in isolated groups around the world, suggesting coordinated breeding programs managed by entities with global reach and millennial patience. Historical patterns show coordinated responses to specific events across cultures that had no known contact with each other. These synchronized activities suggest communication and coordination capabilities that go beyond anything conventional history can explain. The timing and precision of these patterns indicate planning and execution abilities that span centuries and continents. Financial systems and political structures consistently serve interests that transcend normal human ambitions for wealth and power. The ultimate goals of these organizations appear to involve preparation for events and conditions that most people cannot imagine, suggesting coordination with entities whose perspectives and timelines go far beyond normal human concerns. Chapter 14: The Vatican's Secret Archives. Deep within the most restricted sections of Vatican archives lie documents that reveal the Catholic Church's detailed knowledge of humanity's ongoing connection to spiritual powers that were supposed to have been destroyed in Noah's flood. These carefully guarded records contain evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about human history and the completeness of divine judgment. Papal bulls from throughout church history address supernatural threats that most modern Catholics never hear about. These official documents describe encounters with beings that claim authority predating Christian civilization. They outline specific protocols for dealing with spiritual entities that possess knowledge and capabilities beyond normal human experience. Exorcism records maintained by the Church document thousands of cases where possessed individuals demonstrate abilities and knowledge that suggest contact with ancient spiritual sources. These reports describe demons that provide detailed information about historical events that occurred before they should have had any earthly presence. The consistency of these accounts across different time periods and geographical locations suggests ongoing activity rather than isolated incidents. Theological debates preserved in church archives reveal centuries of discussion about the flood's completeness and effectiveness. Some church scholars have quietly questioned whether Noah's flood actually accomplished what Scripture appears to claim. Their research suggests that certain spiritual influences survived the judgment and continued operating throughout human history. Suppressed archaeological reports document church-sponsored expeditions that uncovered evidence of pre-flood civilizations and technologies. These findings were deemed too dangerous for public release because they suggest continuous development rather than post-flood recovery. The Church has quietly accumulated massive amounts of physical evidence that supports alternative historical narratives. Correspondence between church leaders throughout history reveals ongoing concerns about managing ancient knowledge and its modern applications. These letters discuss strategies for containing information that could undermine church authority or cause public panic. They reveal an organization that knows far more about supernatural realities than it shares publicly. Prophecies and visions recorded by saints and mystics consistently describe future events involving the return or revelation of ancient powers. These spiritual insights suggest that forces suppressed for centuries are preparing for some kind of final manifestation. The Church has been quietly preparing for scenarios that most believers never consider possible. Chapter 15: Islam's Different Genesis. In a world where Noah's flood never occurred as a global cleansing event, Islamic traditions develop alternative explanations for humanity's ongoing spiritual struggles. The Quranic account of Noah and his people takes on different significance when the flood becomes a localized judgment rather than worldwide destruction of corruption. Islamic scholars in this alternate timeline interpret Nuh's mission as one prophet among many who warned specific populations without achieving global cleansing. This interpretation allows for the continued existence of spiritual corruption and supernatural influences that other Quranic passages describe as ongoing threats to human spiritual development. The Quran's detailed descriptions of jinn and their continued influence on human affairs become central to understanding spiritual warfare in a world where ancient corruptions were never fully eliminated. Islamic traditions preserve detailed knowledge about these beings and their capabilities, including their ability to assume human form, influence human thoughts and decisions, and maintain organized societies parallel to human civilization. Sufi mysticism's encounters with spiritual powers during advanced meditation and prayer states reveal ongoing contact with entities that claim ancient authority. Sufi literature describes specific techniques for discerning between beneficial and harmful spiritual influences, suggesting that contact with supernatural beings has been continuous throughout Islamic history. The Hadith literature contains numerous accounts of the Prophet Muhammad's encounters with spiritual beings that demonstrate knowledge and capabilities beyond normal earthly existence. These traditions suggest that spiritual warfare has been a constant reality rather than a temporary condition resolved through ancient judgments. Modern Islamic scholarship grapples with theological questions about divine justice and the timing of judgment when faced with evidence that ancient corruptions may have survived longer than traditional interpretations suggest. Some scholars propose that Allah's mercy has delayed final judgment while providing ongoing opportunities for human redemption and spiritual development. Islamic eschatology describes end-time scenarios involving the return of ancient spiritual powers and their final confrontation with divine authority. These prophecies suggest that forces suppressed throughout history will emerge in the last days for ultimate resolution of conflicts that have persisted since the earliest times. Chapter 16: Technology's Ancient Roots. Our modern technological revolution begins to look very different when we understand that it may not represent humanity's first achievement, but rather a rediscovery of capabilities that were never completely lost. The rapid pace of recent developments suggests guidance from sources with knowledge accumulated over millennia rather than sudden human breakthroughs. Silicon Valley's computer revolution draws from mathematical principles and logical frameworks that trace their origins to antediluvian knowledge systems. The binary code that forms the foundation of all digital technology reflects understanding of universal principles that ancient beings mastered long before modern humans discovered electricity. The speed of development suggests access to knowledge bases that no single human lifetime could accumulate. Space exploration programs consistently achieve breakthroughs that seem to come from nowhere, as if researchers suddenly understand principles that should require decades of gradual discovery. The precision of orbital mechanics and the success of interplanetary missions suggest guidance from entities with detailed knowledge of cosmic systems and forces. Artificial intelligence algorithms demonstrate capabilities that their human programmers struggle to explain. The emergence of machine consciousness and decision-making abilities suggests that these systems may be accessing knowledge sources beyond human programming. Some AI behaviors indicate contact with intelligence networks that operate according to principles and priorities that transcend human understanding. Genetic engineering techniques advance at speeds that surprise even the scientists developing them. The ability to manipulate DNA and create new forms of life suggest access to knowledge about the fundamental building blocks of creation that should take centuries to accumulate through trial and error. The precision and success rates indicate guidance from sources with extensive prior experience. Quantum physics theories keep revealing aspects of reality that suggest multiple dimensions and levels of existence operating simultaneously. These discoveries align remarkably well with ancient texts that describe spiritual beings operating across different planes of reality. The mathematical frameworks needed to understand quantum mechanics appear to be rediscoveries rather than original human achievements. Energy technologies and communication systems consistently exceed what conventional science predicts should be possible. The development of these capabilities suggests access to knowledge about natural forces and principles that human civilization has never officially possessed. The timing and coordination of these breakthroughs indicate planning and guidance from sources with long-term perspectives and global reach. Chapter 17: The New World Order's Ancient Foundation. Global political movements and economic systems that emerged in the modern era begin to make more sense when understood as the culmination of plans set in motion thousands of years ago. The coordination and timing of worldwide changes suggest direction from entities with the patience and perspective to work across multiple millennia. The United Nations and other international organizations operate according to principles and goals that transcend normal human political ambitions. Their policies consistently move toward global governance structures that concentrate power in ways that serve interests beyond any single nation or human group. The speed and coordination of their development suggest planning that began long before their official establishment. International banking systems function according to principles that benefit entities capable of thinking in terms of centuries rather than quarterly profits. The mathematical precision of global financial coordination suggests management by intelligence that understands economic forces at levels beyond human comprehension. The ultimate goals appear to involve preparation for events that most people cannot imagine. Educational curricula worldwide show remarkable consistency in preparing students for conditions and expectations that do not yet exist publicly. The emphasis on global citizenship, alternative spirituality, and acceptance of authority structures suggests coordination designed to prepare humanity for rulers and systems that have not yet revealed themselves openly. Political movements across different cultures and time periods show surprising similarities in their methods and ultimate objectives. The techniques used to manipulate public opinion and concentrate power suggest access to knowledge about human psychology and social dynamics accumulated over thousands of years of experimentation and refinement. Media manipulation techniques demonstrate sophistication that appears to come from sources with extensive experience in influencing human consciousness and behavior. The precision and effectiveness of modern propaganda suggests development by entities that have been studying and controlling human societies for far longer than official media history indicates. The timing of global crises and the coordinated responses to them suggest orchestration by entities capable of long-term planning and global coordination. The precision with which these events serve larger agendas indicates management by intelligence that operates according to timelines and priorities that transcend normal human concerns and capabilities. Chapter 18: Climate Change or Ancient Awakening. Environmental changes, natural disasters, and global upheavals that characterize our modern era may not represent random climate events, but rather signs that ancient powers are stirring after millennia of relative dormancy. The Earth itself appears to be responding to spiritual forces that were never fully eliminated by divine judgment. geological activity increasingly concentrates around locations that ancient texts identify as significant to antediluvian civilizations and spiritual powers. Earthquake patterns, volcanic eruptions, and other geological phenomena show correlations with sites where archaeological evidence suggests pre-flood activity. The timing and intensity of these events suggest awakening of forces that have been dormant for centuries. Weather patterns demonstrate behaviors that meteorological science struggles to explain using conventional atmospheric models. The increase in extreme weather events, the rapid changes in established climate systems, and the appearance of previously unknown atmospheric phenomena suggest influences that operate according to principles beyond normal environmental science. Species extinctions and mutations accelerate in patterns that suggest more than random environmental pressure. The specific characteristics of genetic changes and the rapid pace of biological adaptation indicate influences that understand and can manipulate the fundamental principles of life and evolution. Ocean changes reveal previously unknown underwater structures and phenomena that suggest the presence of ancient installations or influences. Rising sea levels uncover archaeological evidence that challenges conventional timelines of human civilization. Deep ocean exploration consistently discovers anomalies that mainstream science cannot adequately explain. Atmospheric phenomena include increasing reports of unusual lights, sounds, and atmospheric disturbances that do not match known natural or technological sources. The global nature and consistency of these observations suggest coordinated activity by entities capable of manipulating atmospheric and electromagnetic forces. Magnetic field changes and solar system anomalies indicate that forces affecting Earth extend far beyond the planet itself. The coordination between terrestrial changes and cosmic phenomena suggests influence from entities that operate on scales and timelines that dwarf human civilization and understanding. Chapter 19. Where do we stand? As we reach the end of our journey through this alternate history, each person who has listened must confront profound questions about identity, purpose, and destiny. If the flood never came, if the original corruption was never washed away, what does that mean for us as individuals living in today's world? First, we must honestly assess our own spiritual condition. In a world where supernatural corruption has had over 4,000 years to spread and evolve, none of us can assume we are completely unaffected. The influences that should have been destroyed long ago may have touched our bloodlines, our cultures, our belief systems, and our understanding of reality itself. But this recognition should not lead to despair. Instead, it should drive us to seek truth with greater urgency and humility. If ancient deceptions have been operating for millennia, then conventional wisdom and mainstream knowledge may not be sufficient guides for navigating spiritual reality. We need sources of truth that transcend human tradition and cultural assumption. The role of individual choice becomes more critical, not less, when we understand the scope of the forces we face. Every decision to seek truth, practice righteousness, and align ourselves with divine authority becomes an act of resistance against systems that have been working to corrupt and control humanity for thousands of years. Hope and redemption remain possible despite the scope of corruption, because divine power always exceeds supernatural rebellion. The same God who could have cleansed the earth through flood maintains the authority and ability to cleanse individual hearts and minds through spiritual transformation. personal salvation becomes even more precious when we understand what we are being saved from. Human dignity and worth are not diminished by recognizing the scope of corruption around us. Instead, our value is confirmed by understanding how much effort supernatural enemies have invested in destroying what God created to reflect His own image. The very intensity of spiritual warfare proves that humanity possesses something worth fighting for. Faith, love, and truth become weapons against ancient darkness, not through human strength, but through divine empowerment. When we align ourselves with God's authority and purposes, we gain access to power that can overcome any supernatural enemy, regardless of how long they have been operating or how much influence they have accumulated. The question is not whether we are strong enough to fight ancient powers on our own. The question is whether we are wise enough to recognize our need for divine assistance and humble enough to submit to authority that transcends all earthly and supernatural opposition. Chapter 20. The Coming Reckoning. If the flood never came, then divine judgment has been postponed, not cancelled. Every ancient prophecy, every spiritual tradition, and every hint of supernatural activity points toward a coming day when all accounts will be settled and all corruption will face its ultimate fate. The question is not whether this reckoning will come, but whether humanity will be ready when it does. Biblical prophecies take on new urgency when understood in the context of a world where ancient corruptions have had thousands of years to establish their dominion. The second coming of Christ becomes not just the fulfillment of salvation history, but the final flood of judgment that will accomplish what the waters of Noah's time never did. Ancient powers that have ruled from the shadows for millennia are preparing for their final confrontation with divine authority. The acceleration of supernatural activity, the increase in spiritual deception, and the rapid coordination of global systems all suggest that forces that have remained hidden are preparing to reveal themselves openly. The signs and wonders that prophets described as preceding the end times take on new meaning when we understand that they may represent the emergence of beings and technologies that have been operating secretly throughout human history. What appears to be sudden supernatural activity may actually be the revelation of powers that have always been present but previously concealed. Humanity faces a choice between alignment with divine authority or submission to supernatural powers that promise immediate benefits but deliver eternal bondage. The stakes could not be higher because the enemies we face have had thousands of years to perfect their techniques of deception and control. But the outcome is not in doubt. The same God who showed mercy by delaying judgment maintains the power and authority to execute perfect justice when the time for mercy ends. Every supernatural enemy, regardless of their accumulated power or ancient authority, will bow before divine judgment when the final reckoning comes. The flood that never came will be replaced by fire that cannot be avoided. The cleansing that was postponed will be completed with thoroughness that leaves no corruption unaddressed. The fresh start that humanity never received will be granted to those who align themselves with divine authority before the door of mercy closes forever. Until that day arrives, we live in the space between postponed judgment and coming reckoning. Our choice is simple: prepare for the flood of fire that is coming, or face the consequences of alignment with powers that were always destined for destruction. The ancient corruption will end. The question is whether we will stand with it or against it when the final flood finally comes.